is there left to say about Final Fantasy VII that has not already been said? Not much really, so see you guys at the end of the show! Semi-seriously though, since its release on the PlayStation back in 1997, Final Fantasy VII has been highly regarded as one of the greatest role-playing games of all time. Really, just one of the greatest games, period. But why? Why do these blocky, strangely stylized characters continue to withstand the test of time when later games in the series that vastly improved upon the visuals and gameplay systems do not? This is especially fascinating considering how quickly the door closes on opportunity in the video game industry. Yet here we are, discussing the lasting effects of a game old enough to be fresh out of college, ready to join the ranks of the real world. Before we get started, even though I am opening and closing this podcast, my good friend Frank, who you may remember from hits such as the arcade episode Quarter Munchers or our episode on Mass Effect, has taken on hosting duties for this episode. It's his first rodeo, so please be kind in the comments. Or you know what, don't. He could use a constructive criticism. And finally, for those of you concerned about spoilers for the Final Fantasy VII Remake, don't be. We do discuss the game, but leave out story spoilers for anyone who has yet to play the game, like me. So sit back, relax, and I'll be back at the end of the show.
After the long calm, there are now the beginnings of a stir. The reunion at hand may bring joy, it may bring fear, but let us embrace whatever it brings. For they are coming back. At last, the promise has been made.
Alright guys, welcome back to another edition of the Los Peleoneros Obsessive Compulsive Gamer Podcast, whatever you want to call it. Today I am taking over hosting duties. I'm Frank. I've been on quite a few episodes already, and tonight we will be discussing both Final Fantasy VII, the original on PlayStation, and Final Fantasy VII, the remake on PS4. Now tonight we have Carlos. Carlos, do you want to say hi?
Hey, what's up, guys?
We also have two returning gentlemen. We have Mike and James. Gentlemen.
Hey, what's up, everyone?
Hey, what's going on?
So, we do have a good selection of questions that we've all agreed upon tonight. We will be avoiding spoilers as much as we can if it is important to the story. We will be talking about it if it, is important enough. But start with our first question with Mr. Carlos. So, first question is, what made the original Final Fantasy VII so special to you?
Well, Final Fantasy VII for me was very special as far as the development of the story and its style of game through. Very unique among the other Final Fantasy games. A lot of great characters, a lot of good story plots. Went into the perspective of elements and magic. Really like all the other Final Fantasies, but this one was very special to me. This is one of the games that had the most shocking things happen in game, and the way it turned out was pretty cool. But I grew up with it. It was closer. It was probably a year before my graduation when it came out, so it's very special.
Oh, very nice. Well, what about it made it so different compared to the other Final Fantasies for you?
The vast amount of characters. It had a pretty range of characters. You had some really cool good guys. Very unique. You had Cloud. You had Barret. You had Vincent, Yuffie. Tifa. So you had all the characters, basically. All the characters that are in your cave Sif. And you had some really unique bad guys that were kind of like anti-heroish, the Turks, Shinra, and of course the main antagonist, Sephiroth. But all around, it was special to me just because it really got me into playing. The story got me into it real deeply, visually. The little side quest you had to do kind of really fill the game up pretty good. And I really got into it. It's really fun to play, and when it was a 4 disc long game at the time, I was already pretty much done with high school, so I had plenty of time to play. So I really invested the time to play, and it was awesome.
Very nice, sir. Very, very nice. James, what made Final Fantasy VII so special to you?
So this is probably one of the first games that I've actually had to sit down for like hours and hours on end to get through. I've never seen a game that was this massive. And I think for my first playthrough, it took me well over a month to get to the end. And so I've actually, the only other Final Fantasy game I ever played before this was Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, which was on Super Nintendo. And I don't know, some people don't count that as a Final Fantasy game. But I enjoyed it. It's very simplistic RPG type, but this is what really kind of threw me into the whole Japanese RPG. Just the sheer scale of it, the story, the characters, the character development. It was, one of those games where you just can't put down because you want to see or you want to progress the story more. And of course, I wasn't too familiar with Japanese RPGs at the time, so I did feel that it was a little grindy on how you had to level up, but I think the story is what kept you going and what kind of kept me going through the whole thing.
Nice. Well, you said about a month. How many hours do you think you put in your first playthrough?
Oh man, to be honest, now I can kind of breeze through it quite a bit, but back then, oh man, it had to have been 40, 50 hours. Must have been. I mean, we're talking about high school, so you're only able to put in a couple hours a day.
That actually seems kind of conservative for a first playthrough, because, I mean, I've never finished the game, but I remember the first time I played, I think I spent maybe 20, 30, and I still hadn't even finished the first disc.
Yeah, I'm just kind of spitballing because I don't really remember, because, again, this was back in high school. And for those who don't know, that was, 20 years ago?
22? Yeah.
22 years ago?
23 years ago? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm, trying to remember my first playthrough of this game. It's a little foggy, but, it had to have been, somewhere between 40 to 60 hours of just sheer gameplay. And back then, that was like unheard of. You never had to spend that much time to get through an entire game.
On consoles?
Yeah, on consoles.
Very nice, sir. Mike, how about you?
So I remember this was probably the second RPG I have ever played at the time that it was released. The first one was Mario RPG, which was also an amazing game made by Squaresoft. Before that, ironically, I really wasn't into RPGs at that time. For me, I was never into the whole wizard medieval type setting, and I incorrectly assumed that was how all RPGs were back then. They were just fantasy games. So I never played any of the Final Fantasy games because it didn't interest me. But then I saw an ad for Final Fantasy VII and saw all the Midgar stuff and the graphics and the cutscenes, which at the time looked amazing. And I was just like, wow, I can't believe this is a Final Fantasy game, so I had to get it. And as soon as I played it, I was completely obsessed with it for several months, like James said. The story and characters were just amazing. I loved the whole setting of Midgar, like in the beginning of the game, which, ironically, that's actually a very small part of the whole game. But I just thought the whole universe was incredible. I loved every one of the characters, and as you progress, they all had interesting backstories and stuff. Like, one of my favorites is, and I mean, it's not a spoiler. Well, it might be a spoiler for the original game, but I love Barrett because you have Barrett and his daughter Marlene, which isn't his daughter, but just learning how he ended up caring for her was probably one of my favorite side stories out of that game. But this game was really important to me because after that, I became a hardcore RPG fan to this day, and that's pretty much my favorite type of game to play. Like, above all the other games that I like, RPGs are now my favorite genre of gaming.
That's pretty awesome. I noticed, like, see, James had mentioned Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, and I think the biggest issue with that is that it was, advertised to the West specifically because Japanese developers didn't think that a lot of American audiences would have the patience or time to really grind through a proper role-playing game, which is why a lot of fans criticize it. Super Mario RPG, that was also actually considered a very simple one, which, I mean, compared to the mechanics of the normal Final Fantasy games, you could say that, but those are still pretty enjoyable. For me, actually, I've never finished the original Final Fantasy VII since I didn't have a PlayStation. The only opportunity I had to play it was actually with Mike or borrowing Mike's PlayStation. So I never had a proper playthrough. My first experience with the series was actually Final Fantasy VI, which back then was Final Fantasy III on the Super Nintendo. And that's still my favorite out of all of them. But Final Fantasy VII, I will have to admit, has probably one of the best universes out of the entire series, if not the best. But
yeah, I would agree.
Especially with the original, with how long that is, it's still pretty impressive. I know how much everybody was able to dive into that. I mean, James, the fact that you first played Mystic Quest and then went to Final Fantasy VII, that's a pretty big jump.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Mystic Quest, for those who don't know, that's like baby's first JRPG. The story is very simplistic. The combat is very, very simple. Just everything about it was very simple. And I got that. I ended up getting that cartridge. I want to say it was like at a garage sale. Somebody was selling it at a garage sale for real cheap. So I had some pocket change and I bought it. But I actually enjoyed it for what it was. But then again, like I said, that was my first introduction into what we know as like an RPG, turn-based.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to add that the testament to how great that Final Fantasy VII was is it's like, it came out in 96, I think. So. And like more than 2 decades later, everyone still has as much enthusiasm for it now that the remakes come out that they had back then, plus all the spin-offs and stuff, and we'll go into all that later. But it's just, that in itself is a testament of how well that world was made.
And the gameplay as well.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Alrighty, so then let's go and move on to our next question. And I'm going to start with you, Mike. What are your thoughts on the Final Fantasy VII remake, having finished it?
So I basically finished it a couple weeks ago, and I loved every minute of it. I'll probably have a little bit of the fanboy goggles on this one, though, but it was absolutely amazing. It felt just like the first time that I had played the game again. whenever I think of Final Fantasy VII, Midgar is obviously the first thing that I think of right away. And this remake being pretty much Midgar, it was really cool seeing that in a new console with updated graphics and everything. They did a really good job making that world look incredible. It's cool that they took what was basically just the beginning of the game and made it a full game in itself. And while I would have loved to like play through the entire Final Fantasy story at once, I see where they're going with this remake, and I'm completely satisfied with it. And I plan to play it again, probably multiple times, just for the experience. So I think they did a great job, and I'm really happy they finally got to release it.
Well, how do you feel about? I'm sorry, I don't want to jump ahead, but are you happy of where it ended?
Honestly, am, because it makes me look forward to what they're going to do next.
Alrighty. How about you, Carlos? What are your thoughts on the remake?
On the remake, I was playing it from beginning, and I was very impressed. It was everything I thought it would be. It just filled in a lot of stuff. You know, the game, it was done its own way, but I liked it. It really, you don't get the feels as far. You don't get the feeling of the Final Fantasy VII, but yet it presents its own feeling to you. It presents its own storyline. The way they remade things a little bit here and there, they tweaked it, but they made it just right where you really gets you. It really gets you, and you don't want to stop. So, I did this. I actually played this live, so I was just like, usually I don't do that, but I got into the habit now. And streaming it was awesome. Just kind of, I like to, rather than just make it a personal experience, I shared it with everybody. This was just right after, just maybe a week later. When I got my copy. But otherwise, the game is very good. I'm looking forward to the way looking forward to what they're going to come up with next, how they're going to take the approach. Because there's a lot of things I saw, and I was like, man. I know, like I said, we're keeping it spoiler free. So all I got to say is I'm looking forward to the next episode.
Very nice. Excuse me. How about you, James?
So you guys probably already noticed, but I pretty much at the beginning I written this game off during its development, mostly because of, I guess, it's had a trouble development, and for a while too. And I pretty much given up on it. I was like, this ain't gonna be made, and if it is made, it's not gonna be any good. I think at some point, like, we didn't see anything for, what was it, like 5 years? Between the time they announced it and the time that they started showing any kind of progress in it. And I guess it jumped a studio too. And so,
I didn't know that.
What's that?
I didn't know that it jumped studios. I just know that it was in development hell for about 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I think the original people working on it, apparently they didn't do a good enough job, and they pretty much scrapped it, everything that they had. So I was expecting like another Duke Nukem Forever at that point, but I was actually pleasantly surprised when I actually played the game. I think that they, they kind of kept a lot of the characters intact, but kind of enhanced a lot of their personalities, their motivations. That the original one kind of just touched on a little bit, right? And I feel like they did an extremely good job with the characters. I actually care a lot more about the characters now, and excited to see what happens to them next, and what kind of problems that they're gonna come across. And so I think that they did an excellent job with that. I haven't finished it yet. I think I'm at the Shinra building now. So we're not getting too much into spoilers, so that's really not necessary to talk about the ending. But yeah, I'm very happy with it. The gameplay, I don't know if anybody's ever played Crisis Core before, but it kind of reminds me a lot of Crisis Core. I didn't play Final Fantasy 15, but I hear it's also very similar to that as far as the gameplay is concerned. I think some people mock it for being a little too simple, but especially with the things like using the use of magic and summons. But I think they did a good job with the gameplay. It keeps it engaging, it keeps it action focused, and I've been enjoying it.
That's good. You know, one thing that I was surprised to hear is, for those of you guys who have played it, is that how graphically impressive this game really is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It looks beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm surprised the PlayStation 4 can even render those graphics.
Yeah, even my Pro was screaming when I was playing it.
And supposedly they're going to come out with a version on PC, so I can't wait to see how that's going to look.
Yeah, it's going to be in a year, I think.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, it's a timed exclusive for a year. So when did this get released? Was it March?
May.
May.
I think it was May. Sorry, coronavirus time dilation is...
I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, we'll see it by Q2 next year for sure on PC and the Series 1, I believe.
Yeah,
Alrighty.
PC, it's going to look beautiful.
Yeah, I just hope my PC can handle it, because I'm definitely going to buy the PC version.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well. So, since we had already kind of talked about where it stops and the pacing as far as the story goes, how do you feel about the episodic approach taken for the remake? And I'll start with you, James.
Well, like I said, you guys know me, and I'm like against that kind of stuff. I hate that, that they will piece together, a complete story, and a lot of it is, business and money driven. And like I understand that they're a business and they need to make money, but at the same time, give us a complete story. But I kind of feel that what they've provided with just the Final Fantasy remake, and this, I guess, this is going to be considered a first episode. It feels complete to me. It doesn't feel like they cut anything out. For what it is, I feel like it's complete. I get a complete story, and just kind of looking forward to what happens next or what happens in the next episode. So I'm just kind of in the middle and on the fence about it. I understand what they did and the reasons why they did it, but at the same time, I feel like they did a good job with completing what they delivered.
How about you, Carlos? How do you feel about the episodic approach?
Like James said before, at first, I thought it would have been great to have seen it all. But I think when the conversation, it was James and Mike, and you as well, Frank, was doing it all in this game. It's a lot to cover. But as far as the episodic approach, as I've been playing it, as I finished it, I think it was well pieced, and they did a lot of things. They put in a lot of things here and there to do that, and also filled out a couple of timelines. But it was well. I think they did the right thing, only because you were able to see a lot of the content. You see it all come to life. You see what they were going for, and at the very end, it that in itself pays off for the time that we waited for just one episode of the remake. So I like what they're doing, and I hope they continue doing it, even if it takes a little longer. But can't wait to see what they do next in the next installment, and put in more of a meatier episode as we go.
Okay. How about you, Mike? Do you like the episodic approach that they've taken for the remake?
I'm just glad it didn't end up like Resident Evil Revelations 2. I was I was really afraid, much like James in the beginning when I was watching all the news about it. I was like, man, this has the potential to go that route. But then I also started to think, like, well, Final Fantasy VII was such a huge game in itself, and redoing it with these graphics, and it would be like 20 discs if they tried to release it all at once. So now that it's actually out and I've played through all of it, I don't have any of those reservations at all. I do feel, like James and Carlos said already, that this in itself is already a complete story. It's they didn't take anything out. If anything, they put a lot into it that wasn't in the original, that part of the story when it started. So I was really impressed with that. And I can't really go too into it without spoilers. So I'll just say they're taking a different approach with this, and that makes it really interesting and makes me want to see their next couple of episodes, or however they're going to do it. I don't know. They could pretty much do whatever they want at this point.
Okay. Yeah, I was very skeptical myself when I heard about the episodic approach, but this game has gotten nothing but rave reviews. I mean, pretty much across the board. There's only a couple of criticisms that I've heard about where this first part of the remake ends, story-wise, and that there's a little bit of criticism as far as feeling the extra content added in, with the characters. It's like, who is it, Jesse, and who's the other one?
You're talking about the side characters? There's Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge.
Yeah, and how they were pretty much given more story just as filler. But I haven't played it, so I can't say how valid that criticism is. But like I said, it's gotten great reviews overall. All three of you are speaking highly of it, even with your reservations. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see what Square's gonna do with the other, possibly 2-3 episodes that are left. It's such a huge game, and considering where the original ended, if they still plan on taking that general route for the narrative, that's going to be a lot of gameplay to cover.
Yeah, definitely. And I've heard a few criticisms about like the filler, but to me, that actually enhanced it for me. The extra characters and diving into their backstory, like the side characters, because it actually made me develop more of a personal connection with Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse that I didn't really have in the original game. Like this time around, since you get to spend so much more time with them and get to know them, it's you really feel for them in the course of things that happen to them in the story. And I don't want to spoil either game if somebody hasn't played Final Fantasy VII in the past 20 years. But if you haven't, you really should, because it's an amazing story.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, there is the Final Fantasy VII port remastered on PS4, and actually I bought that so that I could play through it, because it does have the ability to do the quick level up and have full invincibility, have your full limit break, the built-in cheat codes. That way, for me, who doesn't want to have to grind out 50-60 hours to see the whole game, I can do it a lot faster. So I'll just need to actually play it.
Oh yeah, you can blow through it pretty quick with those.
All right, so on to our next question. What are the improvements and missteps that the remake has compared to the original? And I'll start with you again, Carlos.
So as far as the game itself, with the improvements compared to the original, I think this game, the remake, did take it to another level as far as like backstories and everything with the characters and a lot of other stuff. Trust me, there's a lot of things that they added and threw in, but it worked. Compared to the original, of course, the original had had the characters, but there was a lot of things that were on certain characters that was missing. But as far as missteps, I really didn't see any missteps. So the only thing I would say that really doesn't pertain to the game is just that, of course, in the original there was really no voices. It was always just text, right? It was always just text, which is all good. But with the remake, of course, they had to select voices. Now I prefer would have had the voices from like the other animations, but that's a different thing. But otherwise, I really didn't have a problem with it. I really didn't have a problem the way they went with this game at all. So I really can't complain. I'm very neutral when it comes to it. It was something I was looking forward to, and it's cool. It worked out. I really didn't see a mistranslation. I mean, there are, but that would then be going into spoilers. So I just kind of keep it neutral with the game, with the two games.
Okay. So how about you, Mike? What are the improvements and what are the mistakes over the original that the remake has?
The pros, definitely the appearance of the game looks amazing. Midgar in itself looks like enormous. It's just a really good, like there's people walking around everywhere. It seems like the city's really alive, and whenever things happen to the city, like you're just walking down an area and people are having conversations about what's happening. And I think they did a really good job of just making that seem very real, like a lived-in world. The narrative, in my opinion, is better this time around, mostly because of the attention to detail and other characters. And I mean, the game is like 40 plus hours, depending on what you do in the game, I guess, focused around Midgar, so that gives it a lot of time to focus on like everything about Midgar. I will have to say Chapter 9, which is the wall market part where, you're with Don Corneo and, you have to cross-dress or whatever. Like, that chapter is probably one of the best things I've seen in an RPG ever. It is so incredible. Like, just going through all of that. That was my favorite chapter so far in that whole game.
What made it so special?
So, I don't want to go into details. They changed a little bit of it. I mean, the end goal is pretty much the same, but just they added some new characters into it that I think flesh out that whole environment more. The interactions between Cloud and Aerith and Tifa, they're really good and humorous at some times, and they were in the original game, if you remember that part of it. But here, I don't know, it's just more of a spectacle. It's like, it's grander somehow. Like, I don't know, it's just, visually, it's amazing, and story-wise, it's just like, it really grips you, and it's a little different from the rest of the game. Because the rest of the game, you're just, fighting, doing, battling Shinra soldiers and creatures and whatever. And in this game, you're really not doing any of that. You're just walking around Wall Market and interacting with people, and the whole part where Cloud gets his dress and stuff is made into this huge spectacle too. It's really crazy.
How about cons?
Yeah, so cons, there isn't a lot, but I do have some things that I nitpick. I do feel that a lot of the chapters are needlessly long just for the sake of being long. Like, there'll be parts in the original game where you have to go to like one of the reactors, and that's like a couple minutes just walking through it to get to the reactor. But in this one, that whole part is like half an hour. So there was like a couple parts where I was just like, man, like I'm still here. Like where's the end of this part? And there wasn't really anything story-based going on that added to it to make it seem necessary. It just seemed like it was a little long. So, and there were a couple parts like that in the game. The other thing that I understand why they did this, but I felt it was kind of weird was in the original game, with most RPGs, you get as you get more than 3 party members, then you have to start swapping people out so you can decide who's going to be in your main party. In this game, the game pretty much tells you who's going to be in your party. Like, you don't get that option to select a different character. But it's done very well because the game puts it in the story why the other character isn't in your party or can't be in your party. Like, there's actually a reason for it every time. So it doesn't necessarily bother me entirely. I just think it would have been cool to be able to switch out characters and just to see what different abilities people could play off of each other. And the only other thing is probably the side quests, which this is a problem that most RPGs have, is that most of the side quests are pretty much just fetch quests. Like, you just go here, pick up this thing, go back, or fight this enemy, and then tell the person that you fought that enemy. So, I mean, I did all the side quests, and most of them were fetch quests. But all RPGs have that, so I can't really complain entirely that that's a negative or anything.
Yeah,
but these are all...
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's cool. I was just going to say, these are all more nitpicks than anything else. They're not like anything that took me out of the game.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was just going to add that, I mean, most games, a lot of games have fetch quests that, whether they're cleverly disguised or they're unapologetically fetch quests, you know, it's, if you're having fun playing it, you know, it's not as bad.
Yeah.
To call it a fetch quest.
And I had fun with them. They were creative with a lot of them, I have to admit, but there was a point in the game where I considered just not doing them and just continuing.
Okay. All right, James, how about you? Improvements and missteps of the remake.
So I think one of the biggest improvements is, of course, the characters. They become more, friendly with each other. Their conversations in battle becomes a little more friendlier, supportive. Whereas in the beginning, they're making fun of each other or criticisms about their combat abilities, things like that. And you see that in the first battle with Barrett and Cloud in that first boss. A lot of the things that they'll say to each other, hey, Cloud will tell Barrett, like, hey, you need to watch my back, and that's when you take a hit or something like that. And Barrett just cusses at you and tells you suck at whatever it is you're doing. But then later on, it becomes more compliment. They compliment each other a little bit more and more appreciative of the help that you give them in combat. So, and this transfers over to the story as well, and how the character's development progresses as well. So I really do appreciate how they progress the characters and give them more of a personality. And of course, some people were criticizing the side characters, Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse, but I actually appreciate them giving them more of a fleshed out character, a character that you can actually care about. So I think that helped out with the game quite a bit, because the whole point of this story is that you care about the characters, what happens to them, and how they progress through the story. So it would make sense to have character development and characters with personalities that you can identify with.
Fair enough. What about cons or missteps?
Like I said before, there's not too many missteps. One of the things that that I didn't quite like is the materia system was completely redone from the original, which I understand why, but I would like a little more customization, like in the original, where you can do things like have an entire summon character, or have an entire healing character. And here they just kind of, summons is just kind of like a thing that you just put on the side, and it can only be accessed at a certain point in the game, or during combat. Actually, a certain point during combat.
That's how Final Fantasy 15 was too. So that was a mechanic they changed already.
Yeah. So I would have rather have had it to where, let me have like a character that just does summoning, right? Let me have a character that just does healing. Give me more of a freedom on how the materia system works instead of restricting it so much.
Okay. So it was more gameplay for you.
Yeah, and just that particular aspect of the gameplay. I enjoyed everything else about it. One of the biggest things about Final Fantasy VII was that the materia and how you can use it in combat, kind of however you want to use it. I really didn't quite appreciate them restricting it so much.
If you do, I just have to add this. If you level up your weapons, though, it does free that up a little bit. Like, as you increase, because they added another thing where you can, as you gain AP, you also get it for weapons, too. Mm-hmm. And as you get new weapons and stuff, you get more materia slots. So it's still a little restrictive, but it does let you ultimately, if you wanted to do that, you could towards the end of the game.
Okay, and you can play classic style, right? With a turn-based combat?
Yes.
So you can, but it's not what you think.
Okay, can you elaborate on that? Because, as someone who hasn't played it, I'm really curious.
So the game itself it's action RPG, basically. So you're moving around, you're swinging your sword, and then when you bring up your menu, the game slows down for a little bit. And you can select magic or choose an item or something. So the classic mode just takes away the ability to move your character around. So the only thing you can do is go into that menu and select your abilities. But the game controls your character for you. And that's all classic mode is. It's not really turn-based at all. It's just you get to only command the menus, and that's all you do.
Oh, okay. I see. So it's more strategic, less real-time stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's just if you want to play more strategically, I guess, which to me, I don't really see a reason to. I like being able to move my character around.
Alrighty. So, going on to our next question then. What would you like to see for the rest of the remake? And I'll start with you, James.
As far as the rest of the remake, hopefully they'll allow us to, see more of the world than just Midgar. Obviously, there's more characters that need to be, introduced. So hopefully we get to those characters. A lot of them are, very fun characters to play as, in the original. They also had their own personalities that I also really enjoyed, like Sid and what was it? Kate Sith. Kate Sith was actually pretty funny. So, yeah, I mean, the development of more the hopefully they put in that same kind of character development that they put in into the remake, into the sequels as well. So, not finished the remake, I don't know where the story is going just yet, but now that I can see what that team can do with team can do with the remake, I'm curious to see what they can do with the sequel to it.
Okay. But what, as far as besides the world, I mean, maybe improvements in gameplay or anything like that?
My biggest complaint, allow for the magic and the materia to be not as restrictive.
Okay. How about you, Carlos?
Well, for the next episode, yeah, definitely. Like James said, the characters, definitely want to see Caves if Vincent being introduced. I really wanted them to go into the Wutai universe to see how that's going to start playing out. Or a trip to Cosmo Canyon, like all those places. As far as the gameplay, yeah, classic mode was really latent. I'll admit that. I thought it would just be more like the classic mode we're used to in the original. But yeah, they need to work on that. Otherwise, I can't wait for them to really go into more detail. Maybe we get to actually see the Sister Ray, But let's see how far they go first, because it's still a lot to cover from Midgard and to the other parts of Final Fantasy VII in a whole. So I'm really looking forward to it. Can't wait to see what else they're gonna dig out.
Okay, how about you, Mike?
Just like James was saying, I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with the other parts of the world, and seeing what they can expand on with like the materia system and things like that. Especially the other characters, because I feel that as you start getting more people, then they will have to let you switch or choose what party you want, because there's a lot of characters in that original game. One of the things that I like about the remake is every time you get a new weapon, that weapon gives you a different special ability depending on what the weapon is. And I'd kind of like to see them add a dynamic to where different characters in your party play off of each other. The closest thing I can compare that to would be like Persona, where you have a bunch of different characters and you level up their confidant and they get new abilities, and then certain characters can tag team attacks off of each other. That would be really cool to see in a game like Final Fantasy VII, and just the way they do the combat in that, I think it's something that they probably could implement if they wanted to. That might be asking too much, but other than that, I want to see the characters, how they introduce them into the story, and I'm looking forward to seeing how all the other worlds look in next-gen graphics.
Okay, and if I'm not mistaken, there's going to be DLC for this, right?
I think so. I haven't heard anything entirely concrete on that yet.
Yeah, they haven't mentioned anything yet about it that I know of.
I heard at one point they were thinking about it, but they haven't said anything more on that.
Okay. Well, the current DLC right now is just like items, right? And materia or whatever.
Yeah, I know because I pre-ordered it, I got that Chocobo summon. Which you still have to, I think, unlock in the game. I don't remember. Maybe I already have it or had it in the beginning. But it was basically just that. Sorry, Carlos, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, go ahead, Mike. You first.
No, I was done.
Oh, I was about to say the Kakatar also.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And that was it. Well, like I said, I don't want to spoil it. I was doing a replay of it. I'm trying to max my character out, basically. Nice. And I actually was able to find the Chocobo. But that's after this conversation, if you haven't found it already.
Yeah, I did want to ask if you had found certain weapons that I haven't found yet. But we can talk about that offline.
Cool.
Okay. Yeah, I just looked it up, and an article that I found states that there are no DLC plans, which is both good and bad. Good because that means that they will be committing all their efforts to episode 2 if and when that comes out within the next couple of years. And the downside is people are going to have to wait for more Final Fantasy VII content.
Another 15 years. Final Fantasy games are horrible at being released.
Let's see. I mean, from the first one, which was, I don't remember if it's 87 or 88. And in case you're not familiar with the chronological order of Final Fantasy, but here in the West, we did not receive the original Final Fantasy 3 or 5 I believe we had just gotten 1 and 2 on the NES, and then Part 4 was Part 2 on the SNES. Then Part 6 was Part 3, and they didn't actually start properly naming them until Final Fantasy VII. So
Yeah.
we eventually did get
confuses me still.
We did get a lot of the Japanese ones eventually released as ports for, I believe, the PSP, and I think on a couple other systems.
Yeah, there was a PlayStation one that had 6 and 5, I think, wasn't there?
Oh, the Final Fantasy Anthology.
That's what it was. Yeah.
Had 5 and 6. If with
I
6
think that's what it was.
3. Mm-hmm. But I mean, after 7, then of course came 8, and then 9. You know, the actual numbering has been better, but I'm not sure about the release timeline, because Final Fantasy 8 came out pretty quick after 7 did, didn't it?
Yeah, 8 and 9 and 10 weren't too bad, but when they, like, Final Fantasy 13? Yeah, it was 13. Like, Final Fantasy 15 was originally called Final Fantasy 13 Versus for, like, a long time. And then they changed it to Final Fantasy 15, and that took, I think, like 10 or 15 years to release. I don't remember. It was a long time. I might be over-exaggerating that.
Yeah. Well, Final Fantasy 15 came out when? 2016 or 17?
Geez, I can't remember.
I think that was 16.
I think it was 16.
Okay. Well, you know, with the gap between Final Fantasy 15 and Final Fantasy 7 Remake, that's only been 4 or 5 years, you know, so hopefully we'll see the next episode pretty quickly. I mean,
Yeah, true.
personally, you know, I will eventually play the remake. I'm not in a rush because I don't really like to play part of a story and then have to wait. I kind of like to have everything available. I guess I've been spoiled by Netflix series and everything like that to be able to binge. So for me, it's more, I'm just looking forward to actually getting the complete experience all at the same time, and looking forward to, you know, a possible complete collector's edition, because the collector in me always wants that.
That makes sense. And to be fair, I keep throwing around the 15-year wait or whatever. That's just me, because I'm very impatient. So I know these games released quicker than I say they do. It's just in my mind. I'm like, this is taking forever.
Right. I got
so
you.
I don't know entirely what the timeline was, but it just feels to me like that.
Yeah. Well, with as well as this is sold, I mean, it's almost a guarantee that we'll be seeing the next part within the next 3 to 4 years. At
sure.
most, I'm thinking.
And I did kind of want to add, it's impressive. I think they used the Unreal Engine for this. And it's just really cool. Like, I just think that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, the Unreal Engine, it's very, very dynamic, and it's got a lot of potential for all types of games. So it's understandable. So, gentlemen, on to our last question of the night. What are your thoughts on the expanded universe and lore of Final Fantasy VII, which includes things like you all had mentioned, Crisis Core, Advent Children, Dirge of Cerberus, etc.? And I will start with you, Mike.
So, Advent Children was amazing to me. I remember getting that movie, and I watched it back 2 times in a row. Like, as soon as it finished, I hit play again, and I watched it again the second time. It was just really cool to see all those characters again, since it had been a while since I'd played Final Fantasy VII. I loved just seeing more Final Fantasy VII. It was awesome. Crisis Core was amazing. I liked it a lot. It's been a long time since I played it, but I remember I actually compare Crisis Core to the remake a lot because a lot of the character models kind of look similar. I would highly recommend that people play Crisis Core before playing the remake, and I'm not going to say any more on that. But it's definitely, you don't have to, but it would be beneficial if you did. And as far as Dirge of Cerberus goes, I only have like 3 words to describe that game, and I call it Dirge of Ass. That game was just not good. I did not like it at all. It didn't feel at all like a Final Fantasy game to me. The characters, story, atmosphere, all of it just felt like they pulled it from some other game and slapped Final Fantasy on top of it. But other than that, like, most of the expanded universe I liked.
Yeah, I think that was the first Final Fantasy in the entire series up to that point that had gotten expanded stories and, you know, more of an exploration of that universe, because, you know, every Final Fantasy up to that point had been standalone. And then, I mean, Advent Children came out sometime in the 2000s, and I remember seeing that, and kind of like you said before, is that it's a testament to the legacy of Final Fantasy VII, the fact that it still has such an interest that they would actually make an animated movie based on that story.
Yeah, it definitely is a world I feel deserves to be explored.
Okay, and a quick question about Crisis Core. So, story-wise, how does the Final Fantasy VII remake kind of fit into that? You don't have to give any spoilers, but does it have like a direct tie the way that Crisis Core had to the original, or do you think that, you know, they've taken some liberties?
Both. So, Crisis Core, if anyone hasn't played it, it's mostly focusing around the character of Jack.
Zach.
Or Zach, sorry.
Zach Fair.
Whatever. It's Zach, which makes it a prequel to the story. And there is it ends, and I'm not going to spoil the ending, but it ends as if like if Final Fantasy VII was the second part of the story, and then Crisis Core would be the first part. And then that in itself ties it into Final Fantasy VII Remake also. But there is a specific thing that happens in that game that comes up in the remake.
Okay. All right. How about you, James? As far as the expanded universe goes, have you played, like, you know, Crisis Core, Dirge of Cerberus? I know you've seen Advent Children.
Yeah, I've actually played and seen all of that. I didn't particularly like Advent Children. That story was a little convoluted, difficult to follow, and I guess I'm wondering if it has something to do with maybe a translation from Japanese to English that has something to do with that. So I didn't particularly like I didn't particularly like it, and the story was just a little too difficult for me to follow and fully understand what's going on. But I did appreciate that you can see the characters, and, you know, instead of looking at them in like these, you know, the 5 polygons that they had back in the, you know, PlayStation 1 era, actually see detail in the characters and experience the characters in a different way. So I don't really have too much good to say about Advent Children.
Yeah, don't worry, James. I was confused as hell too, man.
Yeah, and it has something to do with, I guess it's a Square Enix game kind of thing, or it could be just a Japanese RPG kind of thing, because Final Fantasy 13 was probably just as confusing, if not more. But yeah, I just could not. I really couldn't watch it for more than, I guess, the one time that I did see it. Oddly enough, I did have the actual movie on the UMD for the PSP.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, back when they used to have the little teeny tiny discs back in the day. So I had that movie. I don't know what happened to it. I know I gave Bobby a bunch of I think it was Bobby I gave about my old PSP and all the games that came with it. So I don't know if that was in there or not. Dirge of Cerberus was just total shit. It was awful and it was awful and should never have been made. The story was convoluted. The gameplay was jank and awful. I like that they tried to take an interesting character and give him more of a story, and completely fell flat. Nothing about that game was very good.
Yeah, I remember playing Dirge of Cerberus, and I literally got to the end of the first part where that big blue guy breaks through the wall, and I was like, this game sucks. But I'm trying to remember when, in reference to the timeline, does it take place before or after Advent Children?
Ooh.
Wow.
I'm going to say after.
Yeah. Did it come out after Advent Children?
No,
I think Advent Children came out afterwards, because Dirge of Cerberus was, I think, 2003 or 4.
It's a PlayStation 2 game, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that was a PlayStation 2 game.
yeah.
I can't really remember.
I think it was before Advent Children.
I think it was 2, because I remember playing that like a long time ago.
Oh, I was very wrong. It was actually 2006.
Really? That's more recent than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
Oh, that just shows you how bad that game was. I can't even remember much about it.
It was very forgettable. Yeah, and I also I loved Crisis Core. Like I said, I'm not too much into JRPGs or anything like that, but I could see a lot of the inspiration for the Final Fantasy remake kind of came from this too. Maybe in more modern Final Fantasy games, because I think Final Fantasy 15 had a very similar kind of combat layout.
Yeah,
I haven't played 15, so. And it was Crisis Core was more of an action RPG, but it had like this interesting slot machine kind of element, like RNG element to the combat. You have this slot machine that runs throughout the entire combat mode, and it just keeps playing the slot machine over and over again as you get hits on the enemy.
Yeah.
And what the slot machine does is it'll give you different boosts throughout combat, or it'll hinder your combat. I think there's like one in there. If you accidentally match like 3 of the wrong characters, it'll give you a debuff or something like that. But yeah, there's a slot machine that runs, and then I think it also works for your summons as well. So if you match up all of your summons, then you can actually summon a creature.
Mm-hmm.
Which I actually had a really good time playing that game, and that's on the PSP. Do they have it out on anything else right now?
Nah, just PSP.
Nah. Kind of sucks. I wish they would put that somewhere else.
Well, you and I can talk offline, man, because I can hook you up.
I could imagine them probably emulation.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably be the route to play it nowadays, if you don't have a PSP.
So
was it?
I actually have an emulator.
Mm-hmm.
I have it. I have a good
okay.
PSP emulator and the ISO. So if you want, I can get it to you if you're interested.
Yeah. Very interested, sir. Cool. I will be putting on my pirate hat. Yeah, so I wish that they would re-release it that in some way so that other people can enjoy it. Because I don't know if was it on the PS Vita? Were you able to download it?
No, not that
I don't think it did. I think it was only the PSP.
That sucks because that's on a UMD. Yeah, so unless you have one of those older PSPs.
Yeah,
That
because the new one doesn't have the slot anymore.
Yeah, that one's going to be a difficult find right there, unless you put on your pirate hat.
Well,
But yeah,
I own the
thoroughly
game.
enjoyed it.
I own the game, so if anybody wants to like say anything to me on that,
I will watch you play it. Wink, wink. But yeah, it also it's a prequel to Final Fantasy VII. It does kind of tell more of the story, of what happens. And I think it fleshes out Sephiroth a little bit too, and his motivations, and kind of you kind of see how or why he is the way he is. I think it fleshes that character out. It fleshes Zack out a little bit more.
yeah, especially Zack.
Yeah, Zack as well. My complaint on that, though, it is very Japanese. The characters can be a little bit annoying. Me personally, I find, like the Japanese anime type characters, sometimes they can get a little annoying to the point where I just, I can't relate to the character at all and don't really care what happens to him. And I think Crisis Core suffers from that just a little bit, not too bad. But it is something I'm able to actually play all the way through with no problem.
Okay, very nice. How about you, Carlos? How do you feel about the expanded universe and some of the side games that have come out?
All right. So as far as the expanded universe, like I said, I like Devin Children. I actually liked it for what it was. Yeah, the story was a little confusing. I think it did. This is just my theory. It just might have just taken place right after the whole original, and there's a lot of little details here and there that kind of filled that out. As far as the games, Crisis Core and Urge, well, I actually did a stream on both of those, and I revisited them. So, in a sense, I think Dirge, they worked a little, they rushed that game. There's a lot that could have been improved. Storyline was needing improvement. A lot of things are improved, right? They needed to do. But the way I see it now, when I played Crisis Core, because I was just trying to do a little trivia before the actual new game came out, remake. I played Crisis Core, and yeah, of course, it does tell you the story of Zack, which in the original, if I ask some of my other friends that played the game, they're like, "Who's Zack?" Because they never thought about the character, obviously. But anyway, that's the way it's just spoiler for an old game. But a lot of that game does reveal a lot of missing little details that should have been released with Dirge afterwards. Like James mentioned, yeah, they do have that Japanese look. Genesis in both Crisis, well, actually in Crisis Core, Genesis was actually modeled after the Japanese singer Gact. So you could see that, obviously. Maybe after this, I'll even post a little video for you guys. But afterwards, but with that, yeah, he was the base model, and he actually did do the vocal. He actually did do the voice acting in the Japanese version. So he was Genesis. But if you played the game carefully, and I don't know how many of you guys beat the game. I know you guys.
Yeah, I played it all the way through.
Yeah, I played it. Yeah, I beat it.
We're cool about me mentioning some stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
You remember when Shinra, right? Shinra basically picks up Genesis. He's basically done, supposedly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they pick him up, and lo and behold, before after Crisis Core is done, we know what happens to Zack, so forth. But before the game got released, and there was Dirge, and I don't know if you guys don't mind me saying anything on Dirge, right?
Nah,
I'll go for that.
Play it.
All right. So, I played it through, and I've beaten it before. But in the very, very end, remember how the cave where Lucrezia is? Vincent has always been visiting Lucrezia. His ever love for her and so forth. Well, later on, you see that basically Genesis lived. He was in the cave the whole time.
Oh, wow.
So they could have continued on and built a better game out of it. But at the same time, like you guys said, it would have confused everybody. So I could see that aspect. I mean, me personally, I like the games. I'm a diehard when it comes to the original and even its little side games. Even the Before Crisis on the mobile, which I really didn't get to play. Played a little bit, but I wasn't going to pay money to play it on the cell phone because I had a Razer then, and I wasn't going to be able to handle it. Just like with Metal Gear, it was hard enough, couldn't do it that way. But I like the expanded universe. It does explain a lot as far as characters, and there's so many things I could mention. But like I said, I'm trying to keep it as minimal as possible, only because not everyone's played it. But I was happy with it. Even that little anime short with Before Crisis, I think it was after. I don't know if you guys saw that one where it's an actual anime. It just shows Zack taking on Sephiroth.
Really? I hadn't seen that.
Yeah, that's one you might want to look for. So I don't think I even have it anymore. I might have it somewhere, but as far as Crisis, as far as adding children, there was a special edition where they added more things, which didn't make sense. They had a little thing with Marlene.
Oh, cool. And
it's funny the way she reacts, but you'll have that's once we're back to a normal society, I'll have to show that to you guys, or we'll find a way of doing that. There's ways, but that's another thing. That's pretty much how I see it as far as the expanded universe. I like the way where it went.
I do want to add one thing. If for some reason you haven't played Final Fantasy VII and you've listened to this podcast as long as you have for whatever reason too, you should play Final Fantasy VII before you play any of those games, because there are things that spoil Final Fantasy VII if you play Crisis Core or Cerberus.
Yep.
Right. Definitely.
Okay. Yeah, with my experience, like I have a lot of more just secondhand experience with the series. So I have seen the movie. Crisis Core, I've only really watched gameplay footage because I didn't have my PSP very long. I did have the game, played it a little bit, liked it, but it just wasn't something I got into. Dirge of Cerberus, like I said, that was not an enjoyable experience, and I felt like that was kind of a waste of money.
Yeah.
The Before Crisis, the mobile game, actually was never released outside of Japan. So unless there's like a fan translation mobile version available, I don't think you can really experience that the way it was intended to be. But I agree with Carlos. I don't really like mobile games, but it is supposed to give you just more of that expanded universe. So yeah. Thank you all very much, gentlemen. Did you have anything you want to add? Any last thoughts?
One last thing I forgot to mention also with Crisis Core or with Dirge, mentioning Gact, he actually provided the soundtracks and the last two tracks toward the game when you really get into depth into it. So it feels like you're every part of an anime. It feels like you're playing Devil May Cry. I mean, not as cool as Devil May Cry, but you have that background music where he's actually vocaling or playing the background. And then later you get to the main boss and so forth. That's as much as I go. But otherwise, the all-around experience of Final Fantasy has been enjoyable.
Nice. What about you, Mike?
Even so many years later, it still gives me the same excitement that I had the first time I played the game. I don't think my life as a gamer would be the same without Final Fantasy, because I would have never played any of the other RPGs that I love now. Like, I remember Xenogears was the next one I played right after Final Fantasy VII, and then I started playing like Breath of Fire, and now fast forward many years later, I'm playing like Nier and Mass Effect, and like I'm looking forward to the Xenoblade remake or re-release or whatever. I don't even know what remake means anymore at this point. But yeah, I definitely wouldn't have given RPGs a chance if it wasn't for Final Fantasy VII. So that's definitely a huge impacting game to me.
Very nice. And how about you, James?
Well, you can see what a testament Final Fantasy VII is, because can you really count how many actual Final Fantasy games had that many spin-offs or had a want for a remake?
Yeah,
So
I remember.
it's quite the impact. The game itself is quite the impact, and that's just like the development of the characters themselves, the gameplay. Everything seemed to be put together very well. Other than that, it's one of the games I remember the most as, in high school playing. And, me, I'm not too much into like a lot of the Japanese RPG stuff, but I will sit down and I will play Final Fantasy VII, the original, all the way through. And I've played that game several times all the way through. I feel like I've gotten a pretty good hold on the combat. And I don't normally do a whole lot of turn-based RPGs, but that one is one that I will sit down and play all the way through.
And there you go. I mean, it just shows you the impact of Final Fantasy VII to be able to draw in, somebody who's very casual, and then, somebody who hasn't even been interested in that type of gameplay. And I think that just is as much a testament to Final Fantasy VII's legacy back then as it is to now, where the remake is out and is available. So if you haven't played it, you should check it out. If you haven't played the original, like me, you should definitely go and finish it, like me.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, gentlemen. I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining me. And hope everybody has a good night. Thanks for listening.
All right. Dirge Service sucks.
Not at all.
Have a good night, man.
So how did Frank do? I, for one, think he did a fine job considering it's his first time hosting. I'm sure he'll be doing more. As for the rest of our guests, these guys really do know their Final Fantasy VII. You could tell they wanted to spill the beans on the remake. We may have to revisit this podcast a year from now and actually discuss details on it. I'm glad they brought up Crisis Core, as I do feel it is the best Final Fantasy VII outside of the original game. How will Square Enix handle the extended universe storylines in upcoming episodes of the remake? Only time will tell, but play Crisis Core if you can. It's definitely worth it. Oh, but play the original Final Fantasy VII first if you haven't. It's everywhere now. I think you can play it on your fridge? Anyway, this episode's opening and closing music comes directly from the original Final Fantasy VII soundtrack. The opening music, titled Those Who Fight Further, was first heard during the game's opening boss battle, the Scorpion Sentinel. Hearing this more intense battle music made it clear that this fight would be different. The closing music, titled Jenova, is first heard during your initial encounter with an incomplete Jenova boss. The eerie, sci-fi themed melody blends in well with the enemy that is literally out of this world. Both tracks were composed by the legendary Nobuo Uematsu, responsible for some of the greatest music in video game history, and not just for Final Fantasy. Check out the description for links to the audio tracks and for more on Uematsu-san's contributions. Well, thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back in 2 weeks when we discuss Street Fighter, or wrestling games. I'm actually not sure which, but, it'll be one of those. Peace!